Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'm from West Virginia. We have some of the lowest broadband deployment in the country, unfortunately. We also are subject to flooding, flash flooding in particular, and actually, I think about today on a day, tomorrow will be the 5-year anniversary of a very devastating flood we had in southern and sort of middle West Virginia. But I wanted to ask Chief Johnson this question about FirstNet. I was able to go to Kingwood, West Virginia, where we dedicated a FirstNet facility and tower sites built in West Virginia. But in your testimony, you mentioned that for resiliency, the importance of backup power generators. So is that a frequent thing for first responders in the western part of the United States, where people have backup generators for first response to keep their systems up and running?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Senator. It is a frequent issue in the West. It has been exacerbated by public safety power shutoffs, which are de-energizing the electrical grid to avoid starting fires. So when you take down the power grid intentionally to avoid starting a fire, it is only a matter of time until the towers, the facilities, et cetera, their backup power expires. So that's why we're working with the California Fire Chiefs Association, et cetera, to work with the state legislature to speed the process by which we get permits and get backup power generation to these towers. That's what maintains our wireless connectivity.
Well, thank you. That reminds me, and you brought this up about the permitting. I know that some of these, I look at permitting major lines in West Virginia. You have to go under streams, or you try to get the right of way, or you want to work with the power company. I don't know, Mr. Law, if you have the same kind of issue in your home. What can we do to speed up the permitting? Because it's time and money. We're going to have the money. We just need to make sure we shorten the time to get to those last places.
Thank you, Senator Capito. I have two suggestions I think that could be implemented relatively simply. There were recommendations from the FCC's BDAC Committee, Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, which Mr. Adelstein was involved in, that had some excellent recommendations to streamline the application process for crossing federal lands, particularly, which I know is also an issue in West Virginia.
Forest Service, yeah.
Yeah, for us, is for Golden West, my organization, Forest Service, BLM, just a whole national parks, all sorts of things. Again, I don't think it's anything that the federal agencies are doing intentionally, but obviously their primary jobs are not to manage the rights of way on their lands. Right. However, once you make an application for right of way, I will tell you it's a deep, dark hole. It feels like that goes in and you don't see it come to light until 2 years later, and you have no visibility into the part of the process, and that has to be changed. That's one suggestion. The second suggestion is you need to be cognizant of environmental and all of those items. So I'm not suggesting otherwise. However, when you are in particularly road right-of-way that has been disturbed, they use that to build the road, yet still being required to do all and then some of the environmental reviews when you are in the road right-of-way. It seems a little bit redundant to me. I understand if I'm going cross-country across what I would term to be virgin territory, there should be environmental reviews. There should be a higher standard set for that. But when I'm in a disturbed road right-of-way, some of the permitting and application processes for that, which is I'll say our main trunking and backbone lines, that has to be speeded up, and I would think we could do that.
Yeah, and we're trying to build that into the Surface Transportation Act. I know a lot of states have tried to do that, the dig once prospects, and I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Mr. Edelstein, let me ask you a question. You mentioned BTOP, or not BTOP, you mentioned RDOF and rural USDA and Department of Commerce. We have ARC in West Virginia, Appalachian Regional Commission, which has a broadband component to it. What we're finding is, for instance, if we've auctioned off the census tract in the rural auction, but it may be surrounded by something that the ARC is going to work, and you have to go through one to get to the other, these agencies just fight one another rather than try to work with one another. Let's just say if the ARC could build it quicker, could the FCC work with them to make that happen? Why doesn't that happen? Does it make too much sense?
Well, when I was running rural utility service, we used to get called in the White House. I told a story earlier about Vice President Biden calling me in to try to coordinate, make sure the agencies were working together. What I really learned from the perspective of somebody who's on the receiving end of applications, people saying, I want to serve your area, that's really important, I think, in West Virginia in particular, is that we didn't get to choose who came in and applied. We didn't say, we want fiber here, we want wireless there. It depended who came in the door.
Right.
And when you're in a state like yours, and I worked with your predecessor, Senator Rockefeller and Senator Byrd on this, you don't have really a great history. You have really pretty, second-rate infrastructure in some ways because of the history. Nothing to do with the senators, nothing to do with the providers. It's just that they didn't have the rural co-ops that for years were getting RUS funding, USF funding. And so when you're thinking in West Virginia about who's going to come in the door to serve us, you can't get some company just that's new or that doesn't have good infrastructure nearby that's going to come in and do it. You've got to give flexibility, I think, to the agencies that you're giving it to. Make sure they're coordinating. Maybe put in place in the statute, actually, if you're to go to more than one, and you can decide if you put it all through RDOF or something else, but have a coordinating function within the law itself so that they're required to coordinate. But then watch out, because you got to make sure that whoever comes to the door is in a position to actually serve West Virginia and kick the tires of what comes through.
Well, I've got a real problem with one of the providers that is going to walk out with several $100 million in the RDOF in the state of West Virginia, and they have a terrible track record. They have not lived up to their obligations in the past, and yet they were awarded. They're still in process too. Now, they didn't get all of it, but they got a big bunch of it. And my understanding is if they don't move forward, well, in 5 years, the only thing they have to do is pay a fine. And then you got 5 years of people who aren't served or underserved, and, well, you can tell, very frustrating for me. Last question, Mr. Law. One of the things the administration, I think, wants to do with the funding, and you mentioned that you thought the FCC was the best place for the increased funding. They're really high on municipal networks. We've had a couple municipalities in our state that have tried them, a couple that have failed. But could you talk about municipal networks and without disparaging a municipality?
Sure, and I would say in general terms, and I would stress that my comments are in general terms. I do not necessarily think municipal networks are the preferred method for delivering broadband, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I don't think there's a great track record of success of governmental entities, whether they be communities or otherwise, competing with a private business. Even if that private business is lousy, for lack of a better word, communities competing, governmental entities competing is historically not beneficial. That's item one. The second item is you're still going to have a large number of constituents that are haves and have-nots, because whatever governmental entity you pick, so let's pick towns, municipalities, that border of that municipality ends somewhere, or if you want to go counties, that county boundary ends somewhere, or go beyond that to whatever district you wish. I guarantee you there will be a broadband subscriber 30 feet the other side of that boundary that says, I don't have service. And so for those reasons, again, in general terms, do I think there should be laws banning it? Not necessarily.
Right. But
at the same time, do I think that the funding should be specifically directed towards municipalities? No.
Yeah, and I have a question too on the ability to maintain. They may be able to stand them up and they may be able to get them moving, but you're talking about over a long period of time to have the expertise and the longevity to be able to maintain and adapt to the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito.